It's Friday, Feedback Friday, the feedbackiest day of the week. Ha! All right, sorry this is up so late. I was working, didn't get home till like after midnight yesterday, didn't get a chance to record during the day. And then today kind of got away with me. You'll see I'm kind of fancy. Well, half fancy. I still have clips in my hair because I've got a black tie function I'm going to with a friend. His date canceled on him, and it's a Robbie Burns night thing. And when he was telling me about it, about a couple weeks ago, I said, well, if you can't find somebody else, I'll go. He's like, really? I'm like, yeah. He's like, doesn't, your husband, wouldn't he be interested in going to something like this? I said, no. A whiskey event? Not my husband. My husband doesn't drink at all. He's like, well, sure. Okay. And I'm like, okay. I guess he didn't like that girl that much. But yeah, he got stuck with a pretty expensive ticket. So it's going to be a fun time. And I absolutely love my friend Erwin. He's a special person. But that's not what we're talking about today. We're talking about the feedback for the week. And this is it's another I love you guys week. The stuff I did on Trump, the stuff I did on Mark Wahlberg, there wasn't a ton of disagreement. And that's fine sometimes, but I'm like, yay, okay, we all pretty much agree. I think one of the things I didn't touch on as much as you guys did was the fact that a lot of people refer to countries as shitholes or places as shitholes. And so what's the big deal? And yeah, the context and all that stuff is, I agree, not being effectively presented by the media. And, we'd all be lying if we said we hadn't described a place or two that way. Or heard somebody describe places that way. I know I've definitely heard it, including about the neighborhood I grew up in. I've heard people refer to the Jane Finch neighborhood as a shithole. I wouldn't call it that, but I have heard it. So that doesn't mean it's not somewhat racist, but it is, when people go, what's the big deal? Fair point. So that brings us to the Mark Wahlberg thing. I mean, I think if you watch his channel, you tend to see things similarly. So, again, not a lot of contention on that one. The video on Aziz Ansari, I knew was going to be more divided. And I think that's actually a good thing. Because as I said in the video, I think we do need a conversation. And I sort of did ask for the other side. And I think I've started to get a better idea of why that the scandal, I'll say, because it's not just about the initial article. A lot of people haven't read the initial article. They read the responses in the Atlantic and the New York Times and other places and formed their opinion without actually reading the account. Now, I think the original account does have some issues with it as well in terms of how it's written, in terms of the caliber of journalism practiced. And I retweeted a few articles that talked about that. And that is absolutely a completely fair point. You guys know that that's not my interest here. My interest here is, just sort of community solutions would be the technical term. Like, let's not worry about the law. Let's not worry about innocent until proven guilty. Let's start having people communicating better and having better experiences. And it seems like the big nerve in this issue, based on the comments, and I took some extra time to read comments more slowly, a lot of the times, because there's hundreds of them. I'll sort of skim them, get the gist, but then if one is like, oh, that's an interesting point, I'll go in and read it more closely. This one I actually took the time, and I actually read even ones that are saying, you're totally wrong and you don't know what you're talking about and I've never been more against you and all that stuff. I understand that these situations inspire really tender emotions. So all good. What seems to be going on here is that, and I tried not to make this gendered. I tried to say this isn't just something men do. This is something that some women do also. And, my overall rule of thumb is, for God's sakes, keep your junk off somebody else, men and women alike. Just don't touch your privates to another person's body, or try to make them touch yours, unless you're absolutely sure they're okay with it. Or you have to admit that part of it is you're trying to freak them out, you're trying to gross them out. The thrill for you is they're not okay with it. Those are basically your two options. What seems to be happening from the other side is, when is the woman in this instance accountable? How much can we expect there is a responsibility to say no in a way that is clear? And I'm like, that's the disconnect. And it's the difference between a perfect world where we all sort of, behave perfectly, which is not our world, and the realities of our world.
Delicate hair and sensitive scalp, you need gentle care that soothes and moisturizes.
Okay, sorry about that, guys. My computer just started playing a commercial. Anyway, it's the disconnect between a perfect world and the world we actually live in. And I guess it really is still poorly understood how strongly young women are socialized into being compliant and not saying no and not standing up for themselves. And that happens in really insidious ways. It happens, it's sort of a thing where it starts with, you don't want to play somebody with someone when you're little. It's like, go play with them anyway. It's like Cousin Kyle in the South Park game. He's forced to play with him, even though he can't stand him with cause. That starts eroding. Well, the boundaries never form, because kids, when they're babies, really have no boundaries. They have to be picked up. They have to be touched. They're not self-sufficient. And in a perfect world, as somebody becomes increasingly self-sufficient, they also figure out what they like, what they dislike, what their values are and what their morals are. And then once they have those, they learn how to set boundaries and protect them. And for a lot of people, that process doesn't happen, or it happens only partially. And so what happens is, it starts very young, of not being able to choose who to play with. And I have seen this change since I was a kid. And it was, if you don't like him, just stay away from him. That's what we were always told to do. Not always possible, not a perfect solution, but that was when you're trying to figure out how to solve a problem, that's what runs through my head. Just avoid them. They don't like you, you don't like them, go to your separate corners. Socialization has changed. Now the idea is, people aren't getting along. You sit them down and you do mediation and you talk it out, and everybody has to be friends. Everyone in this room is your friend. And that's just as not feasible as being able to completely avoid someone. But this is the socialization that, 21, 22, 23-year-old people right now have been taught. I remember talking to my niece, who's in my stepsister's kid, who's in university right now. And she was talking about going to Montreal and staying at one of these Airbnb things where it's just like a bed or a room that's like shared accommodations. And so she was in a different city. She was out in Montreal with a couple of friends. But then she was also, the owner of the property was a much older man that she didn't know. And I was like, were you comfortable with that? She's like, well, it was cheap. It was what I could afford. And so I'm like, all right, someone my age, and granted, I'm more than twice her age. I'm turning 40 next month. But I would not go. Like, the socialization of my generation is you're looking for trouble there. That isn't how this generation has been raised. This generation has been raised with the idea, I can say no whenever I want to. I shouldn't avoid doing things because of other people's potential bad behavior. I am not saying this is right or wrong. Don't forget, anthropology background here. I am not saying something is more moral or less moral or anything like that. I'm just saying this is what is. And so you see that all through the babe.net account of when the rest of us who are somewhat older are screaming at her going, just leave. Like, you shouldn't have gone back. You shouldn't have done this. You shouldn't have done that. It's a different socialization. And, you know, you may be younger than me and saying, I wasn't socialized that way. It's also different income brackets as well. I think part of my thing was socioeconomic as well, that we had to be smarter about this stuff. In a perfect world, in my opinion, there would be more boundaries. There wouldn't be this hooking up culture where you have so-called physical intimacy that is not intimate because you really don't know the person. It's two sacks of meat bashing together. Why? Because this is what somebody thinks adulting is, right? I don't... My sex positivity believes that that is not sex positive. That is actually quite a negative approach to sex. You have extremely low standards of what you expect from the quality of sex. Sex positive sexuality means you validate both the emotional elements you get from sex as well as the physical stuff. But the physical stuff's pretty crappy too if there isn't communication. And, you know, that doesn't mean you have to be madly in love with someone you sleep with. In my opinion, to have a truly positive sexual experience, at least this is what I need. I need to at least know and trust and have some regard for the other person. And that can't happen the first actual date, but the second time they'd ever even met. That's just not possible for me. There has to be more to it. I mean, sometimes you get caught up in the moment. Sure, back in my day, I did. But there has to be more than the awkwardness that when you don't trust a person enough to say, I want red wine, not white. That's not, and you're even considering still having sex with them. That's not positive sexuality. You need that trust. You need to feel like you can communicate. Now, we're also in a situation where a lot of kids, I don't know where this woman's from, but a lot of kids also aren't getting, I hate saying proper, but they aren't getting effective sexual education that again includes personal boundaries and healthy emotional approaches to sexuality. And it's funny because I talked to my friend who's a youth pastor who does youth group at a church, and they try to be an inclusive environment so that he's dealing with kids who are too young for these to quite be issues yet, but there all are kids that, you know, at 13 or 14, they think they might be gay or bisexual or something like that. He doesn't want them to feel like they don't belong, so they don't teach church doctrine of homosexuality is wrong and all that stuff. What they try to do is they try to build up kids' selves and delay those first sexual encounters so that kids can really get a sense of who they are and make their own choices. And that's how they balance church teachings with no sex before marriage and all that stuff with the realities of the modern world. And I deeply respect their program for this. I was very curious about how they did this. And I think that's a fantastic approach. I think when you say people just don't have sex, don't do that, don't do that, don't do that, there's this temptation, there's this taboo. And you're not living if you feel like you're constantly resisting urges. There has to be a payoff somewhere, right? And so this is where it gets into, what is she accountable? Well, here's the thing. When I read that account, And maybe it's because I'm more familiar or more experienced with the way young women talk. This woman is dealing with a lot of guilt, a lot of shame. She's been punished for her bad decisions. And it was a painful lesson. You know, it's a painful lesson to have to override that. I get in a lot of trouble with family stuff because I do not take shit. And it's seen as a bad thing. You guys think it's great because you're gamers, I'm gamers. We're like, get good, let's play, right? Where I was socialized at Jane Finch, it was also, don't get in my space, right? But in my family, you know, and it's funny because there's like the Scotch, Irish, English, Protestant, Catholic, Jewish side of my family. And then there's the, you know, the Germanic, Jewish side of the family. And then there's my husband's family who are like straight up Ashkenaz, Lithuania, Poland, all that stuff. This is the same on both sides, that the idea, it's somewhat more appropriate to make a scene in my family, but it's still frowned on. My mother is always mortified whenever I make a scene, whenever I call attention to myself. She hates it. My entire life, she has hated my God-given ability to draw attention to myself. I personally think that's a strength, and we clash accordingly. I am very opinionated. I speak my mind. I say no. And even I ended up in some situations where I should have stood up for myself and I didn't. And those always are the ones that make me feel worst going forward. And so the woman in this case, Grace, she has no choice but to get better at those skills, or this is going to happen again. She has paid the cost. It's tough unless you've been taken advantage of in this way. It is really tough to understand how guilty, how stupid you feel, how much you beat yourself up. And I think that's the element that some people who are coming at it more from the false accusation, I've been falsely accused, I know what that feels like, I don't like it. I'm one of the few people who has been in a position where I've had to deal with both. You know, it wasn't allegations of sexual impropriety. I was accused of protecting a rapist. In false accusation, of course, this got into social justice circles. And so there's a lot of people who still think I'm a rape denialist and I defend rapists and all that stuff. And it's not fair. It's not fair because sometimes it didn't happen. And so I get that. I'm sympathetic to that. It just doesn't seem like, well, where's the accountability? Well, the accountability is this woman has had to feel shame and self-doubt and gross. And she was probably kind of scared at that time too. And this is where it kind of gets complicated because you look at Aziz Ansari and say, who would be afraid of that guy? I can snap him like a twig. Women are trained, and this is something I have a real issue with. I think it's wrong. So I'm not defending this. I'm just saying women are trained to be afraid of men. And it doesn't matter how big or small the guy is. Some women just have a fear of God put into them about men. Is this misandry? Yes, textbook, fear and hatred of men, as opposed to fear and hatred of women. There are some women who are just frightened of men. They need to earn male approval or they feel worthless. And I think there was some of that going on. But that's why I think this is so important to talk about, because guys, you do have to recognize that if you are involved with a young lady, there is very likely some of that programming going on because it is so pervasive. Like, you have no idea how pervasive this thinking is. I am nothing unless I have male approval. And women will deny it. Like, there's no point in asking somebody that young if that's what's going on. So just like, no, I don't need no man. Growing up, the ones who were going, I don't need no man, the loudest were the ones that ended up, pregnant at 17. If they lasted till 17. 15 sometimes. In one case, 13. Yeah, this is where I grew up. But this is what our culture does to women. It screws up men in in a lot of different ways. We talk about toxic masculinity a lot. We do not talk about toxic femininity nearly enough. And this is a shining example of toxic femininity. You know, that excessive self-reliance that men have? Well, toxic femininity says you have to put yourself in these positions to get male approval that inherently make you feel scared, inherently make you uncomfortable. But that's what being a woman is. This is our lot in life. That's what toxic femininity does. And young people nowadays get this mixed message of you should go anywhere you want. No means no. You can say no at any time. They're taught that. But at the same thing, well, every guy's a potential rapist. So, you know, you need male approval because you need to be hot. You need to be sexy. And people tend to define sexy differently than me. This is another thing that goes on in my family. It's idea of being hot. Well, to me, hot is a feeling, not a look. Hot is basically being confident. And what I think is hot and what somebody else might think is hot is completely different. I mean, I think Nico on Runaways is freaking hot. And then I go, she's supposed to be a teenager. You stop that. I'm pretty sure the actress isn't. But that's when I go, too young, you know. But that whole goth look, that sneer, you know, that you know, that whole thing, that's super sexy. And if she was 10 years older, awesome. But, you know, I like you guys know I love Nicki Minaj. That's a little safer territory right there. I think she's hot as shit. And people are like, she's so vulgar. She's so rude. She's so, yeah, that's what's hot. But that's a very subjective thing. And so when I hear women in my own family going, I want to look hot, I'm like, you decide for yourself what that is. But I'm the only self-proclaimed feminist really in my family. So my mother still doesn't believe I'm a feminist. That's the thing. That's how you give your power away. And as you get older and as you do, you know, those dreaded consciousness exercises, as you get more self-assured, you realize that you are giving your power away and you don't have to do that. Because most people, and I don't like the terms toxic masculinity and toxic femininity. I prefer the existentialist terms inauthentic existences. If you are living an inauthentic existence, if you are trying to do something just to fit in, you're going to get into trouble. You're going to feel bad. And that's basically where we're at. And I'm going to let this phone ring through. Sorry. Okay, it stopped. I got to make that call back and I need to do that fairly soon. But so to wrap, I've heard you and I appreciate your feedback. And I appreciate, even if you got angry at me, that you took the time to explain your position, because this is what we've got to do, right? And I hope you understand that I do think in a perfect world, and I do think we should be focusing on assertiveness more than we are. But I have to play the ball where it lies. I can't just pick it up and put it in a better shot. We are really behind the 8 ball now in social training. Like, that is our realization. So I think to those who think I was way off base and all that stuff, I think we probably agree more than you thought. We're just coming at it from different perspectives, and there's certain assumptions or confusions within that perspective. I mean, I did say that I only know the one side, and I was interested in hearing the other. So my question is now, how do we continue this conversation? What's the next step? I think we're still in the point where people don't feel heard. And so we need to keep in the listening mode. We need to hear what other people are saying and really understand the other perspective so we can create a solution that at least is relatively okay to everyone. So what do you want to say? What do you want, what you perceive the other side to know and understand? Let me know. Leave a comment, because we're going to continue to talk about this. I just have to figure out where to go with this. Now, we have some time because I really have to put nose to the grindstone and finish Lady Bits episode 4. So this is going to be the last daily content for a while, because it's the 19th and I want to get Lady Bits out first week of February, episode 4. And I'm down to 6,000 words from 10. needs to be 4,000. So an entire chunk of the show is now got to be pulled out, put in another show. And I just had too many ideas in this one. So I really got to knuckle down and I really have to focus. I'm not one of those people who can work for something on 30 minutes and then go do something else. It's stay in your lane. I am a very systemized thinker, so I don't multitask well. It has to, has to go down the chart. But I will come back and I will. And then when I start, those gaps between the shows, start doing live content again, I will revisit this because I think it's important. So please, let's keep talking. All right. Thanks, guys.